21. The Kenmu Restoration and the Northern and Southern Courts. From about 1185, Japan was ruled by two independent authorities, the imperial court in Kyoto and the military bakufu in Kamakura. But that system began to fall apart in the late 13th century. By the 1313s, the country fell into chaos. Emperor Go-Daigo wanted to restore political power to the imperial family. He formed an alliance with Ashikaga Takauji, a powerful military ruler. Together, they tried to implement a plan known as the Kenmu Restoration. However, Takauji built a new shogunate headquarters because he was frustrated with Emperor Go-Daigo's politics. It was located in the Muromachi section of Kyoto. The Muromachi period, 1333 to 1568, is named after this location. Political and military elites joined one of two groups. One group supported Go-Daigo and the other group opposed him. In 1336, the two groups went to war. As a result, Go-Daigo had a retreat to the mountainous area of Yoshino. He and his allies created the so-called Southern Court. The Ashikaga shogunate set up a puppet emperor in Kyoto. This came to be known as the Northern Court. For half a century, there were two imperial courts. Because of this, the period 1336 to 1392 is called the period of the Southern and Northern Courts. Nambokucho. Yoshimitsu, the third Ashikaga shogun, brought the Southern Court to an end in 1392. He promised that the imperial prince of the Southern Court would become emperor in the future. But he did not keep that promise. By 1400, Yoshimitsu himself had virtually all of the powers of the emperor. 22. Ming trade. Yoshimitsu had many motives for establishing diplomatic relations with Ming China. He sent envoys to the Ming emperor several times, but his offers of establishing relations were rejected. In 1401, he sent another document addressed to the emperor of the Ming dynasty. The document requested the establishment of relations. With the document, he sent tribute goods, including horses, spears, and swords. He also sent a number of Ming citizens who had been captured by Wako. The Japanese-led Wako were pirates who pillaged the coasts of East Asia from the 13th to 17th centuries. This time, the Ming emperor agreed to Yoshimitsu's request. Accepting this tribute, the Ming emperor sent 100 tallies to Yoshimitsu, beginning the Kango Boeki tally trade with the Ming dynasty in 1404. Tally refers to a certificate of proof that an envoy is an official representative of the shogun. 50 of the tallies were for envoys from Japan to China. The other 50 tallies were for envoys from the Ming to Japan. The tally trade missions were mutually beneficial. It helped the Ming suppress the Wako. It made the shogunate the primary agent for relations with the Ming. This helped the Bakufu control Kyushu, and trade profits stabilized the Bakufu's financial situation. The shogunal court received copper coins, eirakusen, silk and brocade. The trade also provided a significant flow of culture from the Ming to the Japanese capital. This trade continued until 1547, and 17 trade missions completed the voyage to China. 23. The Art of No Theater. Yoshimitsu and other aristocrats also strongly influenced the arts. For the military leaders, giving support to artists was a way to gain cultural and social recognition. This support helped close the gap between the military elite and the nobility in the capital. The most important artists Yoshimitsu patronized were the actor-playwright Kan'ami and his son Zeami. These two geniuses were responsible for combining sarugaku dance, music, masks, and storytelling and developing it into no drama. They took stories from the tale of the Heike, the tale of Genji, Buddhist stories, and collections of narratives. They turned these stories into dramatic art with great aesthetic and psychological depth. With Yoshimitsu's patronage, Kanami and Zeami gained entrance to the elite circles of Kyoto. From these elites, they learned how to create sophisticated performances. Zeami followed his father as the head of the Kanze troupe of performers. He composed Fushikaden, the tradition of the flower of acting style. This work is a fundamental work of art theory of that period of history. It also became the fundamental basis for Noh drama. 24. Sengoku, the period of warring states. The power of the Ashikaga shogunate peaked in about 1400. After that, the court, the nobility, the military, and the major religious groups began to compete with local leaders and provincial warriors. War broke out between daimyo armies in the capital in 1467. It was the beginning of the 10-year Onin War. Elite residents of the capital fled the destruction. The common people had to defend themselves from robbers and masterless samurai, ronin. They also suffered from disease and lack of food. Meanwhile, in the provinces, regional rulers fought with their neighbors. Each tried to gain more territory and control commerce in their area. By the end of the Onin War, the court and the bakufu were powerless. The capital was destroyed. The nobility fell into poverty. But the fighting did not end in 1477. In fact, the Onin War marked the beginning of the Sengoku or Warring States period, which lasted until 1568. During this century, the established system of political and military power collapsed. New military figures came to the forefront. It was the time of Geikokujo, when those below overthrow those above. Local lords fought with one another, formed alliances, broke alliances, and formed new alliances. There was no central government or shogunate to stop their ambitions. 25. Arrival of the Europeans. The Spaniard Francis Xavier was a founding member of the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits. He left Europe in 1541 to work in India and Malacca. In 1547, he met a Japanese named Anjiro. From Anjiro, he heard glowing descriptions of Japan and its people. As a result, Xavier became enthusiastic and decided to evangelize Japan. Xavier and two Jesuit companions reached Kagoshima in 1549. With Anjiro as their interpreter, Xavier preached Christianity and compiled a simple catechism. As a result, about 100 people accepted baptism. A year after his arrival, Xavier made his way to Kyoto. He wanted to ask Emperor Go-Nara for permission to preach throughout Japan. He was unsuccessful in meeting the emperor, and he left Japan for India in 1551. In 1552, he died on his way to evangelize the Chinese. Another Jesuit, Louis Frois, arrived in Japan in 1563. With the exception of 2 years in Macau, he lived in Japan until his death in 1597. Frois met the leading figures of the day. He was a careful observer and recorder. He compiled and sent back to Europe detailed reports of the Church, Japanese customs, and the fall of Hideyoshi. These reports are some of the most significant accounts of that period of Japanese society. It became known as Historia de Japon, which means History of Japan. Portuguese traders arrived at Tanegashima, south of Kyushu, in 1543. Among other trade items, they brought the musket, which came to be known as the Tanegashima iron rod. This new weapon changed warfare in Japan. It played an essential role in unifying the country. 26. Sengoku Daimyo. The period of warring states began with the Onin War in 1467. The power of the Ashikaga shogunate declined. Control over the actual provinces was left to administrators who lived in Kyoto and gave orders to their subordinates in the hinterlands. This power hierarchy began to collapse. Eventually, real control of the domains fell into the hands of kokujin, or provincials. These men combined military skill, social control, and wealth from land and commerce. They created small-scale political units all over the countryside. Government was no longer top-down, it was bottom-up. These local leaders who lived on the land they controlled are now called Sengoku daimyo. Unlike the medieval Shugo daimyo, the Sengoku daimyo lived permanently in the domain. They brought their retainers into their headquarters and organized commerce, agricultural production, and taxation. They suppressed peasant uprisings, conducted land surveys, kenchi, and began to build castle towns. They developed rationales to justify their supremacy over the people in their domain. They issued stern codes of conduct to their followers. They wanted to prevent their followers from placing family or community interests ahead of their lords. These new Sengoku daimyo were not content to stay at home and issue commands. They began to fight with the daimyo in neighboring domains in order to expand their territories. They eliminated rivals inside their own domains and in the areas they wanted to dominate. They taxed land, trade, river, and highway users, warehouse owners, sake brewers, and other merchants. 27. Castle town, port town, temple town. As the Ashikaga shogunate in Kyoto weakened, local warriors grew more powerful. During the latter part of the 16th century, these Sengoku daimyo built fortresses on the top of mountains surrounded by stone walls. Small towers called donjon were added in the center. The mountain castles, yamajiro, were extremely difficult to attack directly. An opponent's only effective strategy was to lay siege to the castle. To protect the castle, the daimyo stored food, water, and weapons for a long siege. These castles were not convenient places for daily living. Therefore, residence for warriors, workshops for artisans, and shops for merchants were built at the foot of the mountain. These buildings formed the first castle towns, jokamachi. Port towns, minatomachi, developed with the money economy and overseas trade during the Sengoku period. Hakata, Sakai, and Nagasaki flourished as trading ports. Kaisen, circuit ships, carried cargo between the Kyoto-Osaka area and Edo. Trade with the Chinese mainland centered on Nagasaki and Hakata. Commercial districts called temple towns, Monzen-machi, developed along roads to popular temples and shrines. They sold religious objects, offered food, and a place to stay, and sometimes became large communities.
Chapter 4. Azuchi Momoyama. 28. Steps toward unifying the country. Fighting between the Sengoku daimyo continued almost constantly from 1467 through 1568. First, they fought to establish control over their own domain. Then they fought to control other domains. Eventually, a small number of powerful daimyo began to unify whole regions. Uesugi Kenshin, Takeda Shingen, Mori Terumoto, Date Masamune, and Oda Nobunaga are among the daimyo who succeeded in unifying their regions. They made alliances with weaker daimyo whenever possible. They gained most of their domains, however, by military force. By the 1550s, these daimyo were regularly organizing armies of 50,000 or more. These armies fought in new, more effective ways. Previously, battles had been fought between individual samurai, but the new battle units were ordinary foot soldiers, coordinated in specialized troops. Commanders could control these soldiers more easily than they could samurai on horseback. Craftsmen learned to manufacture the muskets introduced by the Portuguese. With these muskets, foot soldiers were highly efficient fighters. Oda Nobunaga's ordinary troops, for example, used the new muskets with frightening efficiency. In the Battle of Nagashino, 1575, they used muskets to slaughter the famous cavalry of the Takeda domain. 29. Oda Nobunaga, first of the unifiers. The first of the three major unifiers of Japan was Oda Nobunaga. He was the son of a local military figure in Owari Province, near present-day Nagoya. When his father died, Nobunaga quickly defeated rival heirs for the domain. In 1568, he marched into Kyoto at the request of the emperor and installed Ashikaga Yoshiaki as a figurehead shogun. At the beginning of Nobunaga's military career, he bought 500 muskets, introduced by the Europeans, and trained ordinary soldiers to use them. They were successful against even well-trained samurai, so other daimyo leaders adopted the new weapons and his strategies. Nobunaga was willing to destroy anyone who opposed him. His motto was Tenka Fubu, rule the realm by force. He was especially determined to break the power of the armed Buddhist sectarians who opposed him. He destroyed sacred sites and communities, beginning with the Ishiyama Honganji in present-day Osaka. This temple was a virtual fortress, surrounded by walls and moats. It was the governing center of the Honganji's vast power structure. Like the influential daimyo, it controlled entire provinces by the 1570s. Nobunaga fought a 10-year war with the Ishiyama Honganji and finally conquered it in 1580. It was burned to the ground. Nobunaga's most notorious act was the attack on Enryakuji on Mount Hiei. The monks of the temple supported Nobunaga's enemies and threatened the capital itself. Nobunaga had his troops surround the entire mountain. He then ordered them to burn every building and kill every inhabitant. With ruthless methods like these, Nobunaga conquered almost one-third of Japan. For the first time, central Japan was reunited under one political authority. 30. Honnoji Incident. In June 1582, after one of his military campaigns, Nobunaga returned to Kyoto. He took up quarters in the Honnoji Temple with just a few of his attendants. His son's large force was quartered far away, and none of his main captains was with him. Akechi Mitsuhide, Nobunaga's vassal, was the daimyo of Kameyama in Tamba Province, west of Kyoto. He had orders from Nobunaga to march his army to join an attack against Mori Terumoto for control of the Chugoku area. Instead, Mitsuhide marched against Nobunaga at Honnoji in a surprise attack. Nobunaga died when the temple was set afire. Toyotomi Hideyoshi returned from the Chugoku front and defeated Mitsuhide in the Battle of Yamazaki 11 days later. 31. Toyotomi Hideyoshi, the second unifier. Toyotomi Hideyoshi continued the unification process. He attacked and defeated Shibata Katsuie, ruler of Echizen and Kaga, in 1583. He conquered Shikoku in 1585. In 1587, he swarmed over Kyushu, forcing the Shimazu under his control. Finally, in 1590, he led his armies against the Hojo of Odawara and gained control of the Kanto region. But he did not completely follow Nobunaga's methods. Nobunaga's method was to destroy his rivals, take their land, and give it to his loyal vassals. Hideyoshi's methods included building alliances if possible. He attacked those who resisted him, but he accepted daimyo who came to his side. He reached an accommodation with Mori Terumoto, lord of large portions of western Honshu. In 1585, he took Tokugawa Ieyasu as a subordinate. In the early days of 1591, he convinced the young Date Masamune of Sendai to accept his authority. By this time, Hideyoshi was able to control virtually all of Japan. Hideyoshi built Osaka Castle on the site of the destroyed Ishiyama Honganji. He moved into the fortress in 1584, and Osaka became a major city. 32. The Sword Hunt. Hideyoshi carried out several important policies. In 1588, he carried out the so-called Sword Hunt. The policy had several purposes. First, it separated the warrior class from the peasant class. The warriors lost control of their lands. They were moved to the castle town and became bureaucratic administrators. They became completely dependent on the daimyo for their livelihood and their status. The peasants, on the other hand, lost the right to hold any major weapon, especially swords. They were disarmed and forced to stay on the land. They were not allowed to leave their fields to work for wages or learn a trade. They stayed, worked, and paid tax on what they produced. This guaranteed income for the daimyo. Hideyoshi also strengthened his control over the central provinces. He removed troublesome daimyo and placed his own vassals in charge. To prevent any vassal from becoming too powerful, he moved them around from domain to domain. There were still powerful rivals outside the central provinces. He left them in charge, but kept a close watch over them. The realm Hideyoshi controlled in 1592 consisted of two parts. The central region was under the control of his senior retainers, Fudai. The rest of the country was administered by former rival daimyo, Tozama. Each Tozama daimyo had his own headquarters, administration, military force, and resources for livelihood. They were allowed to run their own domains as long as they acknowledged Hideyoshi as their superior. 33. International Relations, Bunroku no Eki. Hideyoshi was not satisfied with conquering Japan. He decided to take on the powerful Ming China. In 1592, he gathered a force of 200,000 soldiers in northern Kyushu. From there, he launched an invasion of the Chosun dynasty in Korea. Hideyoshi's vassals pushed through Korean armies and reached the Yalu River. A massive army under the Ming Emperor met his troops there. They fought to a stalemate. Finally, Hideyoshi decided to return to Japan without a victory. He tried one more time in 1597, but failed again. Catholic missionaries and Iberian traders were active in Kyushu in the second half of the 16th century. The missionaries preached to the local daimyo as well as to the commoners. Several daimyo accepted baptism and became known as Christian daimyo. Part of their motivation was to build ties with the traders from Portugal. The Christian daimyo sent 4 Japanese boys to the Vatican in Rome in 1582. This Tensho embassy had an audience with Pope Gregory XIII. However, during their travels, Hideyoshi issued one of a series of anti-Christian edicts. When they returned to Japan in 1590, they were unable to spread word of their experiences. In 1597, Hideyoshi ordered enforcement of restrictions on Christians. The so-called 26 martyrs of Japan were crucified on his orders. In a similar incident, Date Masamune sent Hasekura Tsunenaga to Rome in 1613. This Keicho embassy was well received by the European elite. But while Hasekura was gone, more anti-Christian edicts were issued. When he returned in 1620, Christianity was no longer tolerated. 34. Azuchi Momoyama culture. The first 2 unifiers are primarily known for their military and political power, but the Azuchi Momoyama period is also important for its culture. The period is named after the sites of 2 castles. Azuchi is the name of the superb fortress Nobunaga built on Lake Biwa. Momoyama is the name of the headquarters Hideyoshi built at Momoyama in Fushimi. The castles of this period were built on a grand scale and luxuriously decorated. They were designed to fill the viewer with awe. This period is also known for the culture of ceremonial tea drinking. Major daimyo competed in showing off their tea bowls, tea houses, and knowledge of tea. Nobunaga and Hideyoshi learned under the Sakai merchant Sen no Rikyu. Rikyu developed the highest ideals of wabicha. This style of ceremonial tea drinking involved only a few people in a small, simply decorated room. It stressed rusticity and simplicity. The host prepared and served the tea using pottery and utensils of simple design. The ritual was minimal, but it was an upper-class activity. Hideyoshi and Rikyu were considered close acquaintances. But for some reason, Hideyoshi ordered Rikyu to commit suicide, seppuku, in 1591. Another important element of Azuchi Momoyama culture was large paintings on walls and on folding screens, byobu. The master of the period was Kanno Eitoku. His paintings decorated Nobunaga's Azuchi Castle and Hideyoshi's Jurakudai in Kyoto.